Aloha, namaskar, and hello. This is Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and in it, we go beyond outrage to discuss solutions to climate problems facing people, nations, and the world. I am your host, Anu Hittel, and I am broadcasting live from underwater somewhere. No, actually from downtown Honolulu at Think Tech Studios in beautiful Hawaii. And here I have with me today's senior scientist and Coral Triangle Program Manager from 2008 to 2015 at the Nature Conservancy, Dr. Alan White, who is helping us with the story of how the Coral Triangle Initiative got started. And we're talking also about the story of the threats and the solutions to that area. So this episode, which is the Coral Triangle Initiative and climate change, this is really about something that's different from what we've been discussing so far, which is in the sense that in terms of geography, we're going beyond Hawaii and its borders, and we're really looking at what's happening in a different part of the world in Southeast Asia. So welcome.
Thanks for having me on the show, Anu.
It's great to have you. And Alan has actually been in the studios before. He was here almost to the day a year ago with Keith Bettinger, another host. And I would encourage you to look at that episode as well, because in it, Alan has actually discussed threats to that area, to the Coral Triangle Initiative, the Coral Triangle area. And he's discussed the threats as well as really talked more about overfishing. Today, in today's episode, we will really focus in on climate change, and we will look at what sorts of tools are being put together for communities in that area, and what those threats are doing with the additional threat of climate change. So in 2009, there were leaders of 6 countries that got together, and they put an initiative together. They announced this Coral Triangle Initiative. Yeah. And those countries are, let me see if I can do that without looking at my notes. Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East Timor, Solomon Islands, and
Papua New Guinea.
Papua New Guinea. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here because you're going to help us with that story. Right. And so they came together to launch this initiative, and it really is an initiative on coral reefs, fisheries, and food security, right?
Right.
And so this is a really interesting area of the world because it is, first of all, quite highly populated. Yes. But it covers really only 2% of the world's oceans.
That's correct. Yeah.
However, it has got amazing biodiversity within that 2%, right? And it's got about 75, it says from the TNC website, I see, and TNC is the Nature Conservancy, I see that there are more than 75% of all known coral species in this area, more than 30% of the world's coral reefs.
Correct, yeah.
Nearly 40% of coral reef fish species, and this one is the most surprising to me, the greatest extent of mangrove forests anywhere in the world. And this is very interesting to someone in Hawaii because in Hawaii we're trying to get rid of mangrove forests because they become so invasive that they choke
they're
out.
quite important in the Coral Triangle.
That's right, and they're very important in the Coral Triangle, and they add to that sort of
one of the major marine ecosystems.
That's right, and they add to helping with the carbon sequestration and all kinds of other good things.
Provide livelihood.
That's right. Yeah. And so Alan, who has a background in geography and marine resources management with his PhD from Manoa, is going to tell us more about this initiative and how it actually came about and some of the background information to that and to the threats that this region is facing.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Anu, the Coral Triangle Initiative on Coral Reefs, Fisheries, and Food Security was launched in 2009 by the 6 countries, the 6 country presidents. But prior to that, they had had several meetings with APEC and other sort of regional forums where they decided it was very important to protect their marine resources because they have this sort of common bond of having the highest biodiversity, marine biodiversity in the world among those 6 countries. And some scientists over the years have been looking at this biodiversity, looking at the diversity of fish and corals and other marine animals, and sort of actually made a boundary on the map. We may want to look at that map that was set aside and called the Coral Triangle because of the very high diversity. The map that we're looking at the red line actually represents the limits of sort of high fish diversity and coral diversity. The blue line on the map shows us the legal jurisdictions of these countries, or the EEZs.
And the EEZ is the exclusive economic
zone.
And it extends out usually about 200
miles. And there's some disputed boundaries where we see the dotted line in the South China Sea, where there's some disputes over the actual legal jurisdiction of those countries. But the 6 countries came together to form this.
That's the area that China has sort of decided it's going to.
That's one reason why there's the boundary disputes, because they don't agree with China on that boundary in the South China Sea.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that map, if we could just have that back on again for a second, that map is our supposed triangle.
The Coral Triangle.
Okay.
Which it was just named a triangle because of the general shape of the countries and the way it came out as a triangle, but it also has sort of a nice ring about it. So.
Right. I mean, you couldn't just say the coral blob.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So,
okay.
But the important thing is that the country leaders recognize the value of this marine wealth that they have, which is really more than any other single place on the planet. And they came together to form what's called the Coral Triangle Initiative, and they developed a regional plan of action, which we will talk a little bit more about later. But within the regional plan, they wanted to focus on coral reefs, but all the associated resources with reefs, fisheries, and then looking at how they can adapt to climate change and certain threatened species, and then look at how they can manage at a larger scale, scaling up to transnational issues among the countries.
And that's really interesting, because these countries, you know, they're highly populated areas, right? Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia.
Right, which kind of leads into some of the issues that that are affecting the area. You may want to look at the next slide. We undertook in the beginning of the program in about 2009, when it was first launched, we did what was called a Reefs at Risk Revisited, together with the World Resources Institute in Washington, D.C. And they had sort of set a precedent by doing a similar series of reefs at risk for the whole world starting in 1998. And the idea is to do a very detailed analysis of what are the causes of degradation of reefs and fisheries in these tropical marine areas. So we put together this fairly detailed report on the Coral Triangle, which helped the countries better understand, you know, what are the driving forces behind the problems, and then kind of analyzing population growth, coastal development, and, you know, poverty issues that actually affect the condition of coral reefs in the Coral Triangle, and then kind of putting that into perspective for developing a better management plan moving forward across the region. And through that, we kind of came up with a list of the main issues. They were divided between local and global. And of course, the local threats being more on the area of coastal zone development, the pollution of different kinds of upland problems, deforestation, you know, urban development, marine pollution from shipping, oil drilling. And then, of course, some of the primary drivers of reef degradation directly were overfishing and destructive fishing, which impact the condition of the reef. And so these were sort of considered high priority local threats. But then bringing in the global threats, the warming of the seas, which there has been some incidents of coral bleaching in the Coral Triangle over the last few years. In 1998, there was a major coral bleaching that something like 25% of the corals across certain parts of the region died because of the warming of the seas. And then, of course, we have what's called ocean acidification, which has not been measured of having an impact yet, but it's on the radar screen of something to really worry about, because it will affect the ability of coral reefs to grow and be healthy and into the future.
And this is, I just wanted to sort of separate out some of these things that we're talking about. So the local threats and so on is something that you did address last year in last year's interview. So if people are interested in that, I think they're welcome to sort of take a look at that, which is up on YouTube. But also, I know that, you know, obviously one of the global threats in Hawaii and other places is also sea level rise. And that's not something that you're looking at with this initiative necessarily, because you're really looking at the marine resources, right? Not so much what's going to happen on land and the planned sea retreat and habitats and so on being lost there, but really looking more on...
More on the marine, but also in the coastal zone, you know, in the beaches. And sea level rise affects mangroves and affects where development should take place. So sea level rise is being factored into the planning and the coastal zone development. And a lot of the focus is more on integrated coastal management, not just looking at reef conservation, looking at more integrated approaches to management and conservation. So sea level rise is being factored into that in areas that are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise, in certain urban areas and some of the smaller islands, places like that.
Okay. Okay. And so you're really looking at compounding, as we say, some of these local and global threats and what's happening with that.
Yeah, and actually the analysis that was done, as mentioned, separated out the local from the global. But the interesting thing is that the local threats really constitute the majority of the threat, because many of these threats have been going on for a while, and they're sometimes getting worse because of population or because of overfishing, whatever it is. So there's an integrated sort of local threat. When we add in the global, the warming of the ocean and other potential climate change effects, it sort of ups the bar of threat. But the message that comes out of that, the graph that we're looking at, is that we really have to address those local threats to build resilience for fending off the effects of climate change as it comes into force.
Okay.
So climate change won't be the sort of the killer threat. It's really the more local threats, and then that they lower the resilience of the reefs and the ecosystem. So when climate comes in, then it's even worse.
Okay.
So the message is that the planning and the activities in the short term, even to the medium term, really need to address these local threats so that we can prepare for the event of climate change as it becomes more predominant in the threat scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you're really looking at climate change sort of compounding those local threats, and that's what
Exactly,
that graph was about.
Really compounding.
Right. And so the initiative took into account all of these threats and the information that you folks put together in your Reefs at Risk publication and reports, and really has come up to form some scientific or technical advisory committees and things that have come up with objectives?
Yes, the Reefs at Risk report helped refine sort of the plans for implementing the 5 goals within the regional plan of action that was agreed upon by the 6 countries in 2009. And the regional plan of action has the 5 goals. The first goal is to designate and effectively manage priority seascapes. The second one has to do with improving fisheries management, bringing in more of an ecosystem approach. The third one is to establish effective management of marine protected areas. The fourth one is to build resilience to and adaptation to climate change. And then the last one is looking at the threat to species, particular species of importance that are vulnerable. But the key thing within the regional plan of action is figuring out how to do an integrated approach to management. And this sort of led into strategies which are more integrated in bringing these all together so that climate adaptation is built into each one of these goals and each one of the strategies. So if we want to look at the strategies in the next slide, we see that we sort of have an approach which can be adapted to any locality within the Coral Triangle. So we look at the importance of governance, and governance sort of cuts across any effective resource management activity. Fisheries are one of the main resources, so they really have to be managed for sustainability. We have to protect habitats and their connectivity, and that primarily maybe is done through protected areas and other regulations.
Such as your marine protected areas,
marine protected
which
areas,
we will talk about more later.
Later on, yeah. Threatened species and critical species of functional groups within the ecosystems are important to manage and think about. Community and economic development is critical for building the resilience within the human community to undertake these activities. And then, of course, looking at some of the upland inputs through coastal watershed and freshwater resources, and then finally considering hazard risk reduction. So the idea was that this would be more of an integrated approach that could be adapted within any of the countries or in the regional context.
Okay, and the EBM is your...
And EBM is sort of the buzzword for that ecosystem-based management.
Right, okay.
Which kind of leads us to a more holistic outcomes.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so we will talk more about the sort of the regional action that's being taken place and the local leaders that are rising to this regional challenge. I forgot to mention to our viewers that they can tweet us and join this conversation live. And the address is @ThinkTechHI. So it would be great to have some tweets and to ask any questions of Dr. Alan White, who is here with us from the Nature Conservancy's Coral Triangle Initiative, which actually also has a lot of other partners in it. So it's not only the Nature Conservancy. But what I would like to do is also take a quick break and then come back. When we come back, we will talk more about the regional action that's being taken in this initiative, and then we'll also talk about marine protected areas as one of those goals to be achieved.
Right.
So don't go away, we'll be back.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science on Think Tech Hawaii. Come join us every Friday at 2 p.m. when I interview interesting scientists about what they do, why they do it, and why we should all care about it. It's a lot of fun to see. We hear, and you can learn interesting stuff. You'll hear all kinds of fascinating science, and we know you'll have a great time. Hope to see you then. Bye-bye.
Aloha, my name is Justina Spiritu, and I'm the co-host of Hawaii Farmers Series. This is my co-host, Matthew Johnson, and you can catch us every Thursday at 4 p.m. at thinktechhawaii.com. What do we talk about, Matt?
So on Hawaii Farmers Series, we're going to be bringing on the farmers and also supporter of farmers, including restaurants, caterers, as well as government supporters and nonprofits to hear their background stories and understanding our local ag community just a little bit better.
Yeah, essentially there's a lot more that goes into farming and the local food community beyond just producing the food. And we want to feature and get the background story on all these folks and see how we all work together as a community. So join us every Thursday. Aloha.
Aloha and welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage. And I'm in the studio here with Dr. Alan White, who has worked for the Nature Conservancy on the Coral Triangle Initiative. And that's an initiative that 6 countries in Southeast Asia have undertaken to protect their coral reefs and fisheries and address food security issues. And what I find really fascinating about this, Alan, is that it's really a really good example of cross-boundary and transnational coordination. And even though the initiative was first launched in 2009, it really actually is, it's getting going now well, it's been about 6-7 years, but it may seem like a long time, but for these kinds of things, it really, when I'm used to working with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which was signed in 1992, and people are still wondering, well, we're just only now getting all the countries on board. So when you have a lot of governments and a lot of people working together, and not just governments, but civil society and all of those, you're really looking at engaging all of those folks, taking science and politics and putting that together to address threats and to have effective action. So how do you think that has worked in this area, and what kinds of stories do you have from that area for us?
Well, it's not been an easy undertaking, but you're right, it's actually things have moved fairly quickly. Since 2009, when the 6 countries sat down and signed off on the regional plan of action, they immediately started to have what are called senior official meetings among the 6 countries, and then they had ministerial meetings every year, so they could share their work plans and their progress. And then what they did, they set up technical working groups for each one of the 5 goals in the regional plan of action. And on each technical working group, there are representatives from each country, together with the private sector players, some of the non-government organizations or other academic institutions which have a scientific role in the Coral Triangle.
So it really is quite inclusive and even perhaps transparent?
It's transparent. Everything was public information. Anybody could attend the meetings.
Do you find this unusual in that area? I mean, I don't really know much about the area, but just having some experience from living in India, and now of course things are getting a little better with the age of the internet, but just in terms of governments working together in Southeast Asia, how, I mean, I know I'm just sort of derailing you a little bit, but just, if you could quickly address that.
Well, Southeast Asia has a bit of a record of working together too, the ASEAN, the Associated Southeast Asian Nations.
That's right.
But the newcomers, it's part of the Coral Triangle, were Solomon Islands and the Papua New Guinea, because they're Pacific Islands and they'd never were part of the Southeast Asian group.
That's right.
So bringing them in was a bit of a stretch in the beginning, but it's amazing how well they've come in and worked together on this. And those 2 countries in particular have voiced a lot of sort of positive comments on how they've learned from Southeast Asia, being together with the larger countries, more developed countries. And there's been more sharing of scientific information across some of those borders.
It's fascinating.
As a result of that. So yeah, it's been a bit slow, but it's also interesting how quickly the countries have come together and sat down and started to do some real work.
Yeah, and so that they've got these technical groups, And each of them comes up with a plan, an action plan?
Each country has a national plan of action.
Okay.
And the national plan of action is patterned after the regional plan of action. And there's also a monitoring and evaluation system set up for the region, which has developed indicators for each one of the 5 goals. So then each country tries to address at least several of those indicators in their national plan of action.
And that's monitored how frequently?
Well, that's when the countries meet every year, probably every 2 years, they actually try to report on progress towards those indicators.
Okay.
And they need some assistance sometimes, but some of the indicators are fairly simple to measure, so they can actually use those and share basic information in terms of progress on that.
So speaking of the progress, then taking a look at how we've worked at how this has worked in the Coral Triangle, what are the sort of lessons you're learning?
Well, I mean, an important thing is that the countries themselves are engaged in leading the effort. And we've had several leaders come up from within the governments. So, for example, there was a woman, Agnetha, from Solomon Islands, who became the chairman of the Climate Change Adaptation Technical Working Group. And she's been a forethinker in actually motivating the countries and bringing it to her country, but also being active in the international forums. So having these country leaders.
Is that a picture of her?
That's her, that's
Okay.
Agnetha. She works with the
Wonderful.
Ministry of Environment in Solomon Islands, very outgoing, very smart lady. And she's been fully engaged with all the 6 countries since the beginning in 2009 and continues to engage and has brought a lot of benefits to her own country. So some of the outcomes from that technical working group are focused at the regional scale, and then they've also developed what's called a local, sort of a climate change adaptation for Coral Triangle communities, sort of a local guide for how communities can start planning more for their climate vulnerability and assessments. And the key steps that they've homed in on for developing their local early action plans, as they're called, is first of all just getting organized for planning for climate change adaptation, looking at what the context is, what are the ingredients, who are the stakeholders should be, and then kind of looking at their local environment and telling their climate story, figuring out really what they need, what they're vulnerable for. Maybe if we could go back to the other slide, and then carrying on, they conduct a vulnerability assessment once they sort of have this information in hand.
So they look at which areas are at risk or what resources
Exactly,
are at risk
yeah,
and so
and
on.
sort of figuring out their vulnerabilities and what they need to, what their risk factors are and which ones are more important or less so. And then they come up with an early action plan. And oftentimes these plans are linked with other sort of your resource management plans or development plans. Like in the Philippines, for example, each local government unit or municipality has a community development plan or a municipal development plan. So the idea is to sort of link this into those ongoing development plans that they already have in place.
So it's really going from the very local, very, very, I mean, really from each community up, building
yeah.
it up to a national plan and
Exactly.
then a regional.
Well, yes and no. And then at the regional scale, it was more encouraging the governments to provide the resources for their local communities. So the regional plan for climate adaptation was more encouraging governments to develop expertise,
Oh, I see.
to have a center of excellence, and then to bring policies to their local government so they could go ahead and actually undertake the local community planning
Plans.
and action.
I see.
So it was more encouraging the governments to do this for their local, not the other way around.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, you know, we had something else which was talking about telling your climate story, and this is an interesting, we've seen this before, I think, is this from I think the Pacific RISA folks had put something like
Yeah,
this
this is
together?
similar to what the Pacific
Yeah.
Island countries have done, but I mean, it's interesting to look at this slide because this highlights kind of the crux of being successful at the local community or local government level. Because within the Coral Triangle, which is actually quite a large area, very diverse area, there's so many different contexts. So each community really has to know what their context is, what vulnerabilities they have, what resources they want to manage, and then kind of develop integrated management plans, which include adaptation to climate.
Okay.
So, you know, telling that story is the opportunity to engage with the communities and what their issues are. Are their mangroves being damaged by aquaculture development? Or is there illegal fishing going on? Do they have coastal erosion that they need to worry about? Are they facing storm paths, like in parts of Philippines? They have major typhoons that come every year. They have to plan for setbacks, and they're coastal environment. So telling that story plays into the plan.
Yeah, that's very interesting because in Hawaii, Act 83 has, the legislature wants to know what climate effects are happening here
Right.
in Hawaii and how eventually they will deal with it. So they've established an interagency climate adaptation committee that's putting together a report. They've decided to focus in on sea level rise, and we
Right.
had Sam Lemo, administrator for the Coastal and Conservation Lands office who came and spoke here as well. But so they're working on that issue of sea level rise and on planning and looking at vulnerabilities. But as part of that report, they're really trying to put together stories from climate events and how our managers dealing with those stories. So it's sort of similar to telling your climate change story.
Exactly, yeah, and figuring out to what extent climate change, plays a role in the plans that they're developing.
And
Because oftentimes their main concern are the immediate resources they depend on, being fisheries or maybe tourism or whatever livelihood, and then how climate's going to affect that. So it's kind of linking it together. And one thing that has been we've tried to encourage the countries to do is to look at the more traditional tools for managing resources and see them through the lens of a climate. If you have an MPA, how do you consider climate with the MPA? If you're doing marine protected area.
That's right. So that's marine protected areas. And
if you're doing land use zoning, how do you improve the land use zoning in the coastal shoreline area to accommodate possible sea level rise, and using coastal setbacks maybe more aggressively than they have in the past. In terms of fisheries management, think about how fisheries may change with warming of the seas, or some of the other possible effects of storms on coral reefs, and which might affect fisheries management. Wetlands definitely will be vulnerable to sea level rise, and and habitat restoration may be needed in some places to bring back habitats which have been damaged by storms or some weather-related event. So it's kind of thinking of these tools in relation to climate change, so that it's more of a fully integrated package that they're dealing with.
And this is again at the local level,
At the local level and at the national level as well. So the national governments are actually thinking in those terms.
Okay. And so your role in all of this was what?
I was a technical advisor for several of the technical working groups,
I see.
more focusing on marine protected areas.
Okay.
But to some extent also helping the regional secretariat of the Coral Triangle Initiative to be more effective at integrating science into their planning for the regional plan of action and for some of the national plans of action. So, I've had a general role in kind of assisting in different ways.
And so you're really working with the community. Do you go down to different communities that you help, or do you work more at the national government level?
As part of the Coral Triangle Initiative and my work with the Nature Conservancy, it's been more at the national government level.
Okay.
In my own right in past projects, I've worked more at the community level.
Okay.
I still engage with the community level, but through the Coral Triangle Initiative, it's been more working with some of the national leaders and some of the technical people and national agencies that are represented in the technical working groups.
And so you're working with government representatives?
Government representative and some of the non-government organization technical people.
And is that what we're seeing here in this collage of photos?
Here we're seeing some of the very community-based sort of training programs and sort of planning events at the community level. They're actually measuring potential sea level rise on the beach. They're doing some community-based mapping their resources and how they may be vulnerable to effects of climate and weather, where the community actually maps it themselves, and then they develop a simple plan for how they should think about that in the future.
Okay.
So it's just more getting communities engaged in, in thinking about how they're going to plan for the future in managing their
And
resources.
so who runs these kinds of workshops?
Some of these are done by local governments, some are done by national government agencies, some are part of some of the foreign funded projects under USAID in the countries, or other donor funded programs.
Okay.
Some of the non-government organizations like Nature Conservancy or World Wildlife Fund or Conservation International have their own projects where they're doing these kinds
Okay.
of activities as well.
And I'd like to address that issue a little bit more when we come back, because I have a question about how these training programs work and how the foreign and outside folks are viewed bringing in information, and how is that incorporated
Right.
into the community level. So we'll talk about that. when we come back from the break, and we'll also talk about your marine protected areas and the work that you've done around that. So, so don't go away. And again, you can tweet us at ThinkTechHI and be part of this conversation. And we will come back. This is Climate Change Beyond Outrage, and we will come back to hear more about marine protected areas. So don't go away.
Aloha, I'm Kaui Lucas, host of Hawaii is My Mainland, here on Think Tech Hawaii every Friday at 3 p.m. We address issues of importance for those of us who live here on the most isolated landmass on the planet. Please come join me Fridays at 3 p.m. Mahalo.
Aloha, this is Reg Baker and I am the host of Business in Hawaii. We talk about positive stories of businesses in Hawaii, how they have been successful and how they have overcome some of the obstacles that a lot of us encounter when we try to have a business here. And believe it or not, there are a number of positive stories here, and we want to talk to all of you. So we broadcast live every Thursday at 2 o'clock, and it rebroadcasts again on Olelo Channel 54. So I sure hope to see you next time. Please tune in on Thursdays at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Aloha and welcome back to Climate Change Beyond Outrage. I am Anu Hittel, and I have in the studio with me Dr. Alan White, who has worked with the Nature Conservancy on the Coral Triangle Initiative, which involves 6 countries in Southeast Asia, helping to protect their reefs and fisheries and address food security issues. And now we will look at some of the work that you've been doing through the technical groups and in establishing marine protected areas. So, so this is about 2% of the world's oceans, but has a huge amount of biodiversity in there.
And 30% of the world's coral reefs.
30%, so a third of the world's coral reefs are sitting in this
the Coral Triangle.
Coral Triangle.
And one of the most, probably the most single important resource that people recognize in the Coral Triangle from a local perspective are fisheries. And so they're quite concerned about managing their fisheries, trying to maintain good fish stocks, and trying to maintain good breeding fish by maintaining large fish in marine protected areas. So they're quite concerned about maintaining areas where fish can continue to grow to full adult size and reproduce. If we look at this simple table, we see that a 60 centimeter long coral trout or grouper will produce 3 million eggs, whereas a 40 centimeter will only produce about 300,000 eggs.
Right, so you want
So
to get them to be bigger.
It's very important to have them be allowed to grow out to their full size in an area where fishing is not allowed, so that then these can spill over into areas where fishing is going on. So a key thing in the Coral Triangle is really setting up more and more effective marine protected areas across the region. And one nice thing about the 6 countries, they all recognize the importance of having marine protected areas that are effectively managed and that actually benefit fisheries. So it's one of the key tools they're using for improving their fisheries. Because something like 20% of their fish catch overall comes from coral reefs in the Coral Triangle. And often those fish are for subsistence use for people that provide food security, the people that live in the immediate coastal zone.
So marine protected areas, these are different from like Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, where it's like a no fishing zone, or I'm not even really clear about that. But
Yeah.
so fishing is allowed in marine protected areas, only not so much, or how is this particular MPA or marine protected area defined?
Well, generally in the Coral Triangle, everything that's managed within a marine area is called marine protected area, but often there's zones within the protected area. So there's no fishing marine protected areas, and then there's traditional fishing marine protected areas.
Okay, so thank you for,
So we're aiming at
right.
actually having a certain area where no fishing is allowed, like Papahanaumokuakea, and areas also where fishing is more regulated and where destructive fishing is not allowed. And all of those areas may be called a marine protected area, but we need to differentiate the actual no fishing zones.
Right, so it's not that this is a completely no-take zone. This
No,
is
some
just
are,
managed.
but then some are not,
Right,
yeah,
there are
yeah.
some areas which are managed for
For
fish and
sustainable fishing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, and so so tell us more about the MPAs in the Coral Triangle area.
Well, generally, through the perspective of local communities and governments in the Coral Triangle, they see MPAs as a tool for enhancing fisheries production. And they see that by allowing fish to grow out to a large size, reproduce, spill over either spill over through the larvae moving through the sea water, or actually spillover of adult-sized fish swimming outside of the protected area. So they see this as a management tool, and that also contributes to sustainable food and nutrition for people that live in coastal areas. And it generates income for communities because where they have marine protected areas, they can also engage in marine tourism. Often it attracts scuba diving and snorkeling tourists to their areas, and they can charge a small user fee, so they gain through that income opportunity. And finally, of course, marine protected areas conserve biodiversity, which many marine scientists and people around the world are concerned about, but it's not often that the primary concern of the local people in the Coral Triangle that are concerned more with the fisheries management. So there's a variety of reasons, but they are quite a well-understood tool that are being implemented across the Coral Triangle. There's something like 1,900 marine protected areas of different kinds in the Coral Triangle now. So it's starting to add up to something which is called the Coral Triangle MPA system, which was developed through the technical working group of the Coral Triangle Initiative.
Okay.
And this so-called CT-MPA system, or Coral Triangle MPA system, was kind of developed, guidelines for that were developed through the 6 countries sitting down together to figure out what criteria they would want to apply. And within that, they were quite concerned about some scientific concerns of having them to be large enough so that fish could really reproduce within the no fishing zones. So we did a study looking at how large the area needs to be for different species of fish to reproduce adequately within the protected area. And we can see on this graph that some fish will reproduce fully within 500 meters of protection. Some will need 1 kilometer, some 3 or 5 kilometers, depending on the species and how far they move into the pelagic realm.
So this is getting very fisheries scientific, and I just wanted to stop you for a second there. And you've got these lines radiating out, and those aren't lines that the fish recognize, obviously. These are just, you're drawing the lines around
these
where
are how far they tend to swim in their normal life home
just
range.
how far they range.
That's the home range of the fish.
And so you want them, obviously the bigger they get, the further they go?
Larger fish tend to swim farther.
Right, okay.
But some fish don't. Some fish stay in coral reefs, will never move 200 meters in their whole lifespan.
And they may still be large fish.
They still be large fish. Some of the groupers only move a few hundred meters, even though they're a large fish.
So
it depends on the species.
So you're really trying to look at where they would, where they should be left undisturbed.
How much space they need to reproduce undisturbed.
Okay.
So that's being built into the framework that the Coral Triangle Initiative has adopted as part of their MPA system framework.
What's a coastal pelagic fish? It sort of
It's a
seems
fish
like an oxymoron to me, but
it's a fish that stays close to the coast, but it still swims long distances.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so like,
Well, like a jackfish here in Hawaii.
Okay, okay.
The jackfishes will tend to be near the reefs, but they'll also swim quite far.
And is that when they get bigger?
Even a coral reef shark maybe lives on a reef, but it may still travel 50 kilometers just along the shoreline. It won't go out into the deep ocean.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and so you're looking at taking this kind of information and putting it into the design for a marine
A framework for
protected area.
designing protected areas. Yeah.
Okay,
And then
okay.
improving design, and then improving management and implementation.
And then there have been some tools that have been developed from this, right? Such as your atlas and things like that.
That's correct. In fact, coming up with the Coral Triangle MPA system, there's a series of sort of planning guidelines for how to better plan an MPA, and then how to really implement it in a way which follows some governance principles, proper governance, and then some social economic principles so that it benefits the local community. So there's been quite a concern of making it balanced not only for ecological benefits, but also for the social benefits, and then having a good governance system in place. So trying to focus a bit on having a balanced, integrated system which includes people in the planning and in the benefit package, and also really benefits the marine environment through proper scientific design principles and that, so the fisheries and biodiversity are addressed through the process. And the governance side of it comes down to local governments and the ability of the communities to actually enforce the rules that they decide on. So the Coral Triangle MPA system that was decided upon then is really a system of individual MPAs at the very local level. It may have a network of MPAs through ecological connections at the subnational or local level, where MPAs are designed so that there's larval connectivity among the sites, but within a local context. And then there may be what's called national learning networks of marine protected areas, so that the country, within the country, they can actually share lessons. And then finally, the whole regional 6-country system can also share lessons across borders and have what they call a Coral Triangle MPA system in place. So that's the way it's developed. And there's a booklet that was published and being followed by the countries and helping design. They're also taking that and using it as a way of selecting some of the best managed MPAs across the whole region and then providing sort of incentive awards to those that are being well managed so that they can be recognized at an international level for following some of these criteria and having effective implementation.
Sort of giving them medals.
Exactly, and then recognizing them publicly. You know.
That's right. And so I want to get back to that atlas. I'm sort of curious about that, and just wanted to hear more about what you do with this tool and who's using this.
Well, the reason the Coral Triangle Atlas was set up, the countries realized they needed a common database or a common information system for sharing data across the 6 countries, which was consistent and a way of measuring progress towards the goals within their regional plan of action. So the Coral Triangle Atlas was set up initially to have all of the MPAs within the atlas. In other words, each MPA is recognized, the size, what it protects, and then a bit of information on how well managed it is. So with this atlas, you can pull it up and you can see all the marine protected areas in the whole region, or you can home in on a country, and then you can manipulate it. There's a lot of data in the atlas for doing analysis. And there's also climate data, temperature of the ocean, some sea level rise data, so we can actually do some vulnerability assessments at a broad scale within the atlas.
Could you give me an example of a question that this atlas could answer?
Well, the country may, for example, the Philippines may want to know exactly how many countries are managed to a certain level of effectiveness. Well, that information is already in the atlas. They could pull it up and say 20% of their MPAs are being managed at a certain level of governance. Or there's what percentage of coral reef is within the MPA system that they have in the whole country. So the country could say they have 5% of their coral reefs now within a no-take zone of the system.
And then they can make decisions about that, whether
how they should prioritize their resources to improve on that.
Right, or whether they want to expand it.
So it gives them a sense of what progress they're making towards the targets.
Yeah. So who ends up using, and here we've got.
But one of the challenges for the Coral Triangle Atlas is really getting the countries to use it, buy into it, share their data, because it has to be updated with data from the 6 countries, and that is not so easy. So it's important to kind of work with the local government officials and technical people to really get them using the Coral Triangle Atlas and sharing their information.
Right, because that information is only good if it's recent and if it's updated. And as we know, information keeping can be really very expensive.
One of the exciting things about the Atlas, it's been able to produce a map which has consistent data across the 6 countries. It's the first time the 6 countries have seen this information in a map which they can really see that it's accurate and they're part of it. So it's something that has sort of encouraged the identity of the Coral Triangle as a group of countries working together, and the Atlas has helped provide that sort of common identity through the mapping system.
Wonderful.
So it's been quite powerful in that way.
And looks like we have another little story here. So.
Yeah, and at the very local level, just to kind of give us a flavor of how it plays out within the context of one site, there's an island in the Philippines called Apo Island, which was actually protected starting back in about 1984. And it was a community group working with their local municipal government to set aside part of their coral reef as a no-fishing zone. Otherwise, they use sustainable fishing methods. But in recent years, they've been quite impacted by severe storms that have come through the southern Philippines. And some of their protected reef has been heavily damaged by large wave action, storm surge. So now they're doing some major coral reef restoration on the reef. And one nice thing of having that community protection in place was that they recognized the importance of bringing their reef back to life after the storm, after the climate event, which was quite bad in this case. So they're actively still protecting their marine sanctuary, and they're trying to allow the corals to grow back more rapidly through a few interventions through reef restoration techniques that they've been learning.
Okay, well, those are really interesting examples of how these tools are being used, and the fact that marine protected areas have been established in places like the Philippines and Indonesia, similar things. And even though this initiative is somewhat new, I think it will be something it's really quite unique, I would say. Yeah.
No, definitely, it's unique in the sense that I think it's the first time I've seen anywhere in the world where 6 countries have sat down to undertake this scale of operation. And there's a lot of challenges in maintaining the resources and maintaining funds for travel to have meetings and continue with the work. But building capacity is an important aspect of the whole thing. So and I think probably one of the biggest outcomes of the Coral Triangle Initiative to date is that there's been tremendous learning at the national level all the way down to the local level with many various workshops and training, planning events. And
such as what we're seeing in this slide. And I think that, we're sort of running out of time here, but I think that this has been really a great introduction to the Coral Triangle Initiative, and I would encourage people to get onto the website and take a look at what else is happening and to keep an eye on what's going on with this really unique initiative. It might be something that would be very useful for even a place like Hawaii. And so I thank you very much for being here with us today and sharing all of your knowledge and expertise. And I will just close with 2 little quotes. One is from Jacques Cousteau, and it says, "The sea, the great unifier, is man's only hope. Now, as never before, the old phrase has a literal meaning. We are all in the same boat." And I'm not going to say that. I didn't say that in a French accent, so it didn't sound as good. But the last one here is it's a Hawaiian saying, which is "Ina malama oe I kekai, malama no kekai ia oe." So if you look after the ocean will look after you. And so with that, I'm going to close. And this has been an episode of Climate Change Beyond Outrage. We are here every Tuesday with Anu Hittel at 1 o'clock. Thank you very much for being with us. Aloha, namaskar, and goodbye.